Today I want to talk about the curve, flattening the curve, and some of the rhetoric things that are going on. So right now, actually all along, the decisions that have been happening in our government, I'm certain there's a tension. There's a tension between the economy and health, public health. So if your job is public health and your only concern is to stop this disease, to prevent hospitals from getting overrun, then you want to shut everything down for now until it's gone. And, you may care about the economy, but that's not really your job. So if the disease, to the extent that it spreads, you failed to do your job. Other people whose job and concern is mostly with the economy, they would just as soon ignore the disease until it's proven to be a problem, and then we'll deal with it. And it's a common sentiment right now that, we're doing more damage with the shutdown than if we just let it go. So what do I think's going on? Right, the curve. We all know the curve, right? You have a dashed line across, and you have the fast and high curve, if you want to call it. That is the untreated, unchecked spread of disease curve. So what's going on there, if you were to zoom in on the leading edge of that curve, you see a rate of rise, with the horizontal axis being time and the vertical axis being number of infections, number of cases. So for a unit of time, be it a day, a week, a month, whatever you want, there's a certain amount of that creates a ramp. There's you go from this number to this number over that period of time. So as the curve continues, it gets steeper and steeper and steeper, meaning more cases in a given period of time. And the reason that is, if one person has the disease, they infect 3 people, those 3 people infect 3 people, those 3 people infect 3 people. So it grows sort of on an exponential curve. Once you get near the top of that curve and it starts, what's happening is there's no more people to infect. That's the theory behind it. All the people that are going to be infected, they've had it. It's not necessarily 100% of the population, but whatever percentage you expect that to be, they're all infected. So it starts to slow. The increase of new cases starts to slow, the rate of it. And then it flattens out shortly, and then it starts to come down. Why is it coming down? Because people are either dying or they're getting well. There are less cases being reported. So so you see a very high, and the line, the dotted line across, is the capacity of the healthcare system. I mean, it's a model. It's not a perfect numbers thing. It's really a model to illustrate a point. And, that line could mean any number of things, but that's the level you don't want to go beyond. And right now it's healthcare capacity. The flatter curve rises slower. So by separating people, you limit how fast it can spread. So you limit the rate of rise on the leading edge. So it rises slower. And if you do a good job keeping people separated long enough, the theory goes, then there's nowhere else for the virus to go. So the amount of people who are going to be infected, they get infected, and it's a smaller number. Okay, and the same principle, once they start to die or get well, it goes down. The one curve, the unchecked curve, looks very short. The flattened curve looks much longer. Again, I don't believe those are exact. It's about double on the images, but that's really to illustrate a point, a concept. It's not exactly double the time period. I imagine it's reasonable to assume it's larger. So if you're on the economy side, you look at that flattened curve and you say, this isn't good. I mean, we're going to be shut down longer than if we just let the virus go. Let it go, let it run its course, everything is back to normal faster. That's good for me. If you're concerned about health, then obviously that first curve is not where you want to be. So here, I think there's a misunderstanding on the economy piece of that, because that curve is not saying that you shut down at the beginning of the curve and then you can turn the economy back on at the very end, hence 2, 3, whatever magnitudes of time longer that's not what it's telling us. It's about getting the virus in check. And if you look around the world, there have been hot spots: China, Italy, some not so hot. And if you look at the United States, nearly half of all of our cases are in New York. Now, I realize testing, or we're not testing enough, but you consider testing a sample size, so like a poll. So with that sample size, there are nearly half of our cases are in New York State. I believe they're probably clustered around New York City. I haven't been able to find a number to tell me that, but I believe that's probably the case. And that's because New York City is more similar to China. And I imagine, from what I'm seeing anyway, in Italy, population density, a lifestyle and a living situation that brings people together. More apartment buildings, lots of people in these apartment buildings, public transportation, anything that you have more people packed into an area, and just by the way the whole city is designed, they're forced to encounter each other more and more. Now, LA is a very populous city, but they get around mostly by cars. It's more spread out. So the more populated city centers in the country where people are living in the conditions similar to a China and maybe to these industrialized cities in Italy, that's where you're going to see the hot spots. So what do we accomplish by separating? And okay, so by doing the separation that we're breaking down. So if we have United States as one cluster and New York State is another and Pennsylvania is another, those are kind of clusters, if you want to call it that. Within each cluster, there are smaller clusters. There are cities, the big cities. And even within there, they're smaller. By us being separated, you can break it all the way down to family groups. Groups of people that work together. So now we have a lot of little clusters separated from one another. So if the virus hits one family or one work group, one cluster, let's just assume it's going to go through that unchecked curve because there's no way to separate it anymore. So let it run through that one. It's not going to get into all these other clusters, okay? If you have people go from this group over to this group, now this one gets affected, this one. So the more we separate, the more we break off into our own little clusters, the more likely we're to achieve the flatter curve. Also, as time goes on, we're making great advancements in the number of tests, the availability of tests. Today, there was a release of a company doing a 45-minute test. So we're expanding testing. I believe our government and the healthcare community are scrambling right now to get the testing done. And there's a lot of discussion going on and decision making about when and under what conditions we're going to go back to work. And, if through this week or 2 weeks, whatever the shutdown is, if we've adopted these habits of avoiding one another by 6 feet, washing our hands, taking all these precautions that people normally don't care about, they won't even get a flu shot. If we can ingrain that into our psyche and we can make that a new normal, if you will, in the United States, and we're able to test and understand this family has an infection, they're isolated, they can't go back to work, and we have a legislation in place to protect their income, all that sort of thing. So I think that's what's happening. I think that within our government, the two sides are in tension. There's a pull between the economy and the health, and they're essentially fighting it out and trying to find that middle ground, trying to make that decision. The economy people are not happy right now. And at some point, though, the healthcare people, they're just going to have to give in. I mean, because we are going to go back to business. It may be on some limited scale. It may involve some level of testing. But the point being, if we've implemented the testing, we've implemented the new mindset things, we can go. We don't have to wait for that flattened curve to run its course completely before you turn the economy back on. The goal is to protect the healthcare system so that people that get deathly ill can be treated. And right now, the best approach to that is splitting everyone up and unfortunately shutting down our economy. But that's not going to last. So that's how I see it. Hopefully that helps, and have a lot more thoughts. So more videos to come. Stay safe.